I have been bullied, sexually harassed, degraded, and chastised.
A significant increase in people calling us to potentially submit their own complaints. We've been contacted by a total of 38 former and current employees of the CPS.
With complaints mounting, Calgary's police chief is seeking changes to what he calls a restrictive police act. Roger Chaffin wants to see legislation updated to give him more authority to handle HR issues within his force. Echoing that call is a Mount Royal University professor who says the act needs to allow for more flexibility and transparency. Dr. Kelly Sundberg shared his concerns on Alberta Primetime Monday.
How complaints are addressed, where we look at issues with regards to the police associations, their unions. When we look at how the agencies themselves conduct investigations.
Alberta's Justice Minister has yet to commit to a review of the legislation. Kevin, to you first. What's making this legislation look so long in the tooth?
Well, it's 30 years old, and we're dealing with a much different culture today than back in the 1980s. I mean, issues like bullying and sexual harassment were often turned a blind eye to back then. It was considered sort of a part of the culture that female officers who were few and far between would have to basically suck it up and just put up with that sort of behavior. But I think we've evolved as a society in the last 3 decades, and that's no longer acceptable. And I think it has to be addressed in the legislature. Well,
Kevin, what's standing out for you about the complaints targeting specifically CPS?
Well, I mean, it's obvious that these women are still being treated the way officers have been in the past, female officers, and that's not acceptable. I mean, we have to have a culture that is inclusive. We can't have bullying. Bullying can lead to all sorts of negative effects, up to including suicide. So we don't want that happening in our society, and I think we need to address it in 2017 and not 1980s legislation.
Greg, how limiting is legislation where police forces in this province are concerned?
Well, I mean, to the general public, the way that the Police Act, so first off, the Police Act in Alberta is employment legislation. So it's designed to regulate the relationship between the police force and its members. The difficulty is that the Police Act it's drafted, although it's employment legislation, it's almost drafted in a judicial sense. And the Police Act almost acts something that would be similar to, for example, a military tribunal or a court-martial. So what happens is if a complaint is laid, it gets investigated by their internal standards department. If there's sufficient evidence to warrant a charge, then a charge is laid, and then the police officer basically goes to a hearing, and the hearing is similar to what you would get in a judicial process. It's a little more informal, and then the chief of police sits in adjudication of that hearing. The difficulty is there's not a lot of flexibility in terms of being proactive, in terms of employment issues. There's no conflict resolution provisions. There's nothing that, for example, the chief of police can step in ahead of time before it gets to a hearing and to try to triage the issue and to try to, really what we do in the civilian realm in terms of dealing with employment issues. So it's a little bit, I don't want to say it's archaic, but it's a little bit inflexible in terms of dealing with what it really is a different police department today than what we had 30 years ago.
So Greg, what would you do in terms of where you would start with changes?
Well, I think overall, I think police force members are comfortable in that sort of system because they work in the justice system anyways. But they may want to give the chief of police a little bit more latitude in terms of being a little bit more forward thinking, being able to have maybe a process that's more informal to deal with issues such as bullying and poor treatment of female police officers before it gets to a hearing stage. Because once it gets to a hearing stage, police officers have lawyers, they've lawyered up, it's going to a trial, and it becomes adversarial, and it becomes difficult to be able to manage the relationships between the officers once it goes down that road.
Kevin, where would you see changes needing to be made?
Well, I don't know what exactly needs to be done, but I'm sure that the police chiefs of the various forces in Alberta can come up with some ideas. And the fact that chiefs like Roger Chaffin are offering up their services to the province is a very good step forward. And I think the Justice Department and the Justice Minister should embrace that and take advantage of that and get some new ideas from the chiefs and find ways to improve the legislation.
All right, working together.